So, the IoT Security Foundation is back with another episode of our monthly webinar series. If you're watching the YouTube recording of this, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. It helps us more than you know. I'll be talking a bit about this later, but we're gearing up for our next in-person event. It takes place in England next week at the MTC in Coventry on Tuesday, the 3rd of June. The event is sponsored by Thales, and our keynote speaker will be Peter Davies of Thales, and he'll present the business of IoT security, mastering the economics. We'll have a bunch of other stuff, including the Radio Equipment Directive, otherwise known as RED, but I'll circle back to that a little bit later on in today's broadcast. So a bit later this hour, we'll have Jim McGlone of Concentric IoT, but first up is Fred Gordy. Fred is a smart building industry expert and thought leader with 25 years of experience in secure control system development and implementation for Fortune 500 companies throughout the US and abroad. He is one of the first in the smart building industry to address the inherent risk that control system technology poses. He's authorized and participated in over 100 articles on building control cybersecurity with industry magazines, as well as the Wall Street Journal, CNBC, and healthcare publications. His articles have been featured in the US and abroad. In addition to publishing articles, for almost a decade, he led control system cybersecurity workshops and has been a passionate speaker and teacher on the subject of building control cybersecurity. In recent years, Fred has developed control system cybersecurity assessment methodologies, and tools based on ISA 62443 and CIS. He currently serves on building cybersecurity as a technical advisor, ISA 99 as a technical advisor, IoTSF Smart Building Assessment as a technical advisor, serves as a CS2AI Senior Fellow, and recently began collaborating with CISA Security and Infrastructure Security Agency on the critical infrastructure commercial facility sector. An impressive bio, if ever there was one. If you have any questions for what you're about to see from Fred, please put them in Zoom chat if you're watching this broadcast live today. We now cross over to Atlanta. Fred, the floor is yours, my friend.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. And thank you guys for giving me this opportunity. Of course, I know Mike Welch and he's introduced me to you guys, and I've been following what you're doing. And quite frankly, I think the good old US of A could learn some stuff from you guys. So thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. And I got to say something about the gentleman that's going to come after me, because he's one of the ones. I am where I am because of people like Jim. I came into this extremely a novice. I was just basically a control systems guy. Spent a lot of years on a bucket programming, and realized there was a problem. And as such, I began seeking out people to help me understand what it is that we could do to ensure cybersecurity was implemented into our control system designs and that type of thing. So what I'm going to talk about today, I have very intimate knowledge of because I was one of those guys. In fact, I like to tell people, or just tell them the truth, that, I'm the problem. Where I come from, we created the problem. A lot of times people will focus on the manufacturer, and they'll say, well, they should be doing a better job to ensure these products, which is, there's truth to that. And yes, they should do their part. But there's two other people in this chain that we tend to kind of look past, and that one of them is the asset owners. So you'll hear me referring to them. Those are the guys that own the buildings. Those are the guys that take care of the facilities. All right, so that's the asset owner. But then where I come from, I was a service provider or the system integrator. You'll hear it referred to as SI or master systems integrator, whatever, but it's the people that actually take the manufacturer devices and they take what the asset owner says they want and then they put them together. And having been doing this for 25 years, very rarely when I was an SI or a service provider were I ever given anything remotely that discussed the cybersecurity aspect of implementing these systems. So I'm a good old Southern boy, and we tell stories to put our points across. The way I like to look at control system devices, or if you've ever seen the movie Jurassic Park, there's a scene in the very first one where you see a goat being raised up into the T-Rex's compound, and it's staked to the ground. It can't go anywhere. Well, guess what happens? We all saw it. The T-Rex came in and gave all our children PTSD because they saw this T-Rex reach over and consume this goat. Well, I, as a system integrator, the one in between the asset owner and the manufacturer, we basically went in and tied the goat to the stake. And we've been putting these systems out there primarily from a standpoint of convenience, of serviceability. In fact, most of our service agreements were written around the fact that I, as a system integrator, service provider, could remotely get into your systems. So that's a huge problem right now. Just the pure accessibility to these systems. So today, I'm going to talk about how you can manage the me's, the guy that was in between. So one of the first things I want to talk about is, like I said, is you have systems that have been developed over the years with accessibility in mind, ease of access, making the system so that the building owner, asset owner didn't have to engage necessarily at the level that we did. So therefore we were the knowledge keepers of everything. And I'm going to tell a little bit on my former company but they've actually fixed this. When I came there in 2006, we had been doing installation of Niagara systems, Johnson systems, all kinds of systems. We opened this service department in 1998. From 1998 till I came on board, and then even 8 years later, we were still using the same username and password that we did from the beginning. Okay, so that's bad. But if you really stop and think about the number of people that now know how to get into any one of our systems, is everybody that's working there now, everybody that has ever worked there before, have that information. So in time, those numbers just keep increasing, increasing, increasing. So this slide is talking about that former service provider employee. What could happen? Well, a couple of real quick stories. This is one where a former service provider or a service provider's former employee came in to a system that we had given remote. It wasn't us. Another company had given remote access to this company. And so this employee was let go. Well, studies show that if an employee is let go and it's not good circumstances, that within 24 to 48 hours, they may retaliate, right? Okay, so we got a perfect storm. We've got a pissed off employee who has credentials to over 1,000 buildings, and the owners of those buildings, not just this one particular owner, but owners of every building they service, are now at risk. And even more so because they have a mixture of public IP access or something like TeamViewer or LogMeIn. So what happened in this particular case, they called us to come in and do the forensics because they were pretty sure that somebody came in and that and bricked 3 controllers, and they also wiped out 3 servers. And they did that on the way out, obviously. So in this particular case, all I could tell them was, well, first off, the people that came into the systems are wiped clean. Where are your backups? They didn't have them. And I said, well, even if we could, you are telling me there's one username and password, and I can tell you that if I had this information, I could tell you the IP they came from. I could tell you what username and password they use. But beyond that, you can't take it to court, because guess what? Hundreds of people have that username and password. So they had to basically just accept it and move on. And it took them 21 days to get all of that back online. And it was a level of effort by not only the vendor, but also the local people and some of the manufacturer, because they were trying to recover some of this stuff. But the bottom line is there were no incident response plans, there were no backups, there was nothing, and you had a third-party vendor who every one of their employees were still had his username and password. Now let's think beyond that. Is the level of effort for the service provider, because they have more buildings than just this one, is pretty significant. Because I remember when I went back to my boss and said, hey, we got to change this username and password. And he's like, well, who's going to pay for that? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, we have 2,000 systems in the Atlanta area, not including what's in the Southeast. So we're going to have to put a guy in a truck for days to go do this. There's nothing in our contract that says we have to do this. So we're not doing it. So that was never named in there. If we lost an employee, we had to notify the building owners so that they knew, at least they were aware that this person was no longer with the company in case they wanted to come in. And there was no incentive to change any of the credentials to go into the system. Let that sink in. So if you have seen on the news, and I've got examples of this too, where a service provider that you may work with has had a problem, you're at risk, because they may probably, the credentials and access that they got into that other system is probably the same way they get in your system. Now, here's another one where they did have a contract in place. The service provider was given a contract that said, you got to back up our systems, and you got to have come in and perform backups on a monthly basis. I mean, the language around the entire thing was pretty sloppy. Let's just be real. So in this particular case, the vendor was doing backups, but where were they backing them up? Right to the head end. It wasn't being backed up somewhere else. And I see this too all the time. They'll go in and they'll bring a thumb drive in and they'll stick it over somewhere, and who knows where that thumb drive has been. So it could actually be infecting your systems. But that's not a backup strategy. You know, if you're going to back something up and you back it up to the very thing that you're trying to make recoverable, makes no sense. And to take it a step further, this particular one, even more so, the contract was written that said, you not only have to make backups of our system, but you also have to have hardware on your shelf. This is the asset owner telling the vendor they have to have this stuff on their shelf, so that in the event something happens, not only can they come and restore the backup, but they can just bring the equipment in, save the day within a matter of hours. Well, when the system failed, asset owner contacted the service provider. Service provider told him, said, yep, we got the backup, but it'll give us a couple of days. We got to get a server in. And they were like, no, that's not what the contract said. And as a result, when this system went down, it affected the security system that was integrated with the elevators. And so what they had to do was, because this no longer was an option, they couldn't secure the floors that they were supposed to secure. So they had to hire guards to come in and basically stand on the outside of elevator to look at your badge to come in. So when they did get the asset owner said, look, we'll give you a server. That's not a problem. We just need you to bring the backup. Well, when they brought the backup in, and this was 2 years ago, so 2023, the last backup they had performed was in October of 2006. A lot had changed since then, so they basically loaded that on and then had to do quite a bit of work. Now, the next thing you need to be aware of, kind of going back to drive the theme home, that you don't know who's in your buildings. You don't know who's in your systems. You really don't, because of the things that I said earlier. So you may see one or two guys come into your facility, physically. You don't necessarily see all the people that come in remotely. So let's take a look at what that actually looks like. So this is very, 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 very conservative. If you sit here and say, I've got building one and I've got 3 systems, I've got a HVAC lighting and card access system. I have service providers that have most likely remote access into your system. Those service provider has 1 or 2 guys that you see that work on the system. I can tell you from firsthand experience, we had probably in the neighborhood of 100 people that could go into your system. But let's keep it conservative. I'm going to say there's, on average, including former and current service provider employees, let's just say that there's 5 per system. So that's 15 people that you probably never see at a very minimum that have access to your systems. Now, if you have a couple of more buildings, in this particular case, you got five buildings that you're managing. If you take that 15, now you have 75 people that you have no control, no access, or no oversight on. You've just basically handed the keys to the kingdom to your service provider and said, keep me active. That's all you cared about in the past. And as a result, this number continues to climb. Now, if you factor in what my experience is, where I know that we probably had somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 people that could get into any one of these systems. This number is actually 500 people. Okay. Then let's take it one more step, and let's just say we've got 20 buildings out there. That's a minimum of 300 people that have access to your system. Okay. So let's bring it home. When you want to, or what the asset owner has to first realize is, in the responsibility matrix, the asset owner is ultimately responsible. The past has been the asset owner would tell me as a service provider, you should install a Niagara system, and here are the sequences of operations, and that's pretty much it. I'd come in and pull the network cables, I'd sign the IP addresses, I would turn on whatever features I wanted to turn on. Very quick story, I have a customer who is very critical, and when I sat down to do a review with their system, they it was the IT guys and the OT guys in there. They pulled it up, and HTTPS was not enabled, and Fox S was not enabled. And I said, well, why aren't these enabled? And so the OT guy said, well, it's in the IT has us in a secure environment. And I said, so the IT guy said, does it cost us anything? And I said, no, it's just a couple of mouse clicks. But that's the thing, is they're not going to do any more than what they do on a regular basis. Not out of being lazy. It's just that that's the way it is unless you tell me to do anything different. But in the event of an event, if you don't have these things laid out in such detailed in your service agreements, you don't have any recourse as an asset owner. And that's why the asset owner at the top of the matrix, and ISA 62443 is very clear about this. And that's why I personally like the framework or the standards, is because it's not ambiguous. It is laid out clearly what you're responsible for. And as it says here, accountability, responsibility, determining risk, and alignment. I mean, you've got to have the head of the snake, so to speak. When the asset owner turns over this is what I want, this is what I need, then they are going to hand that to the service provider. But again, the asset owner is ultimately responsible for, as it said, accountability and responsibility. The next in this line is the OT manufacturers of the systems. Um, it's incumbent on them to try to improve the security of those systems. But if you notice, there is an arrow pointing from the asset owner. It's their responsibility to do their part to research which manufacturers meet their criteria, the governance, whatever you want to call it. So with that, I'm going to bring it to a close. And I know it's a lot to cover in a short amount of time. It is a lot to take into account, but I guess what I will leave you with this is you have service contracts, and how many of us have seen things that have been copy paste where the system must include a 56K baud modem. I mean, I see that stuff now, and it's because we have atrophied in how we handle our contracts. It's cut, paste, move on, cut, paste, move on. But you as the asset owner is ultimately responsible for that. And as the service provider, you can become that value added partner to them to help them navigate this. And it puts you in an elevated, higher value position with them and makes you more of a trusted advisor. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Fred Gordy in Atlanta. If you've got any questions for Fred, and I can see one or two coming in already, then if you're watching this broadcast live, please put them in Zoom chat. The IoT Security Foundation annual conference will take place in London on Thursday, the 30th of October. This year, it's a joint conference between us and TechWorks AI. We'll be doing our call for presentations soon. But right now, we've got unbeatable sponsor and exhibitor opportunities available. And if you're an IoTSF member organization, you can get 15% off sponsorship and exhibitor packages if you book before the 31st of July. Details are available right now via IoTSF-AI.org, and that link is in Zoom chat right now if you're watching this live.